So I want you to just picture this for a second. It is, let's say, 2:00 p.m. on a Tuesday. You are sitting at your desk staring at your monitor.
Oh, we all know that exact feeling.
Right. And the coffee you had at like 11:00 a.m. has just completely worn off. The afternoon feels like it's stretching out into this infinite, featureless wasteland. You've got a spreadsheet open or maybe an email draft you need to
We
send.
have all the skills to do it.
Exactly. You possess all the technical skills required to do the task. You are well rested. I mean, you had a good weekend. And yet there is this immense, invisible weight pressing down on your hands. You feel this profound, almost terrifying sense of nothingness.
Yeah.
You don't want to just leave your desk. You want to abandon your entire life, move to a cabin in the woods, or maybe just dissolve. You're outwardly functioning, answering the messages, keeping the Slack dot green, but inwardly, you are completely detached from the actual why of it all.
It's a very specific kind of paralysis, honestly. And what's fascinating is how we typically respond to that exact feeling. I mean, we immediately try to solve it with these tools of optimization.
Oh, 100%.
We tell ourselves things like, oh, I just need a vacation, or I just need to drink more water, or I need to download that new calendar app to time block my afternoon. We basically treat ourselves like biological machines with the glitch in our output code.
Right, like we just need a software patch.
Exactly. But when the vacation ends, or, the app is installed, the emptiness is waiting right there for you at 2:00 p.m. the very next day.
So true. Well, welcome to a custom-tailored deep dive into our sources today. We are focusing on a profoundly relevant topic for you, the listener, which is this hidden weariness that sleep absolutely cannot fix. We're taking a massive stack of research, primarily anchoring around this fascinating text called Acedia Awakening.
It really is a phenomenal source.
It is. And we're using it to unpack a condition that plagues modern high-pressure lives. Because here is the wild part, this feeling I just described, the one that feels so tied to our modern digital KPI-driven world.
Yeah, the one we blame on our phone.
Exactly. It was actually diagnosed over 1,600 years ago by people living in the middle of a literal desert.
The historical continuity there is just striking. I mean, we are going to trace the origins of this spiritual exhaustion all the way back to those 4th century monastic struggles. And we're going to draw a direct line from that to our 21st century digital fragmentation.
Which is just wild.
It really is. The core mission of this deep dive is to show you that properly naming this specific condition is the very first step toward true recovery. We're going to extract the practical, sustainable rituals these ancient thinkers developed just to help you rebuild meaning and attention in your own daily life.
I have to say, going through these sources was an absolute revelation for me. It basically gave me vocabulary for a ghost I've been fighting for years without really knowing its name.
Naming it is half the battle.
It really is. So let's just wade right into the diagnostic muddy waters here. If we are not talking about just being tired, and we aren't talking about the standard definition of burnout that gets thrown around on LinkedIn every single day, what exactly is this condition?
Well, to get to the bottom of it, we have to revive a very old word, which is acedia. It comes from the Greek word akadia, which literally translates to a lack of care.
A lack of care, but not like dropping things, right?
Right. It's not carelessness in the sense of dropping a plate or just being clumsy. It describes this complex state where life becomes dull, burdensome, and strangely unreal. It is an inner listlessness. And the sources emphasize a crucial distinction right out of the gate here. Acedia is not simple laziness.
Yeah, and I think that's where the confusion starts for a lot of people. When we hear lack of care, we immediately picture someone just lying on a couch in sweatpants, ignoring their responsibilities and eating junk food.
Exactly. We equate it with outward inaction. But the sources point out that highly responsible, high-achieving people frequently suffer from acedia while remaining perfectly functional on the outside.
They're still doing everything.
They really are. They are meeting their obligations, they're caring for their children, they're showing up to the board meetings, they are paying their taxes. Outwardly, the machinery of their life is humming along flawlessly. But inwardly, their attachment to the meaning of those actions has completely evaporated.
Wow.
They are moving through the motions, but their will is no longer actually participating in the act.
It's the person getting the promotion, shaking hands, smiling at the camera, but feeling like an absolute ghost in their own life. Which, that forces us to draw some really hard lines between acedia and other things we experience. Let's start with fatigue. How do the sources separate acedia from just being deeply, fundamentally tired?
So it really comes down to the body's natural signaling versus the soul's refusal. Fatigue is honest. It is the body's completely natural request for replenishment. If you just ran a marathon or if you stayed up for 3 nights nursing a sick infant, you are experiencing intense fatigue. But here is the hallmark of fatigue. Once you receive rest, once you sleep, eat, and recover, your inherent desire to pursue life returns.
Right. So fatigue basically says, I want to engage, but my legs are literally giving out.
Precisely. Acedia, on the other hand, actively resists rest. I mean, you can give a person suffering from acedia a month of paid leave. They can sleep for 12 hours a night, eat perfectly, lounge by a pool.
Sounds nice, honestly.
It does. But when they return, they will still feel a profound inner refusal toward life's tasks. The physical energy is fully topped up, but the meaning required to deploy that energy remains absent.
I was thinking about this when reading the source, and treating acedia like simple fatigue is kind of like plugging a dead smartphone into the wall to charge. And then you check it hours later and realize the battery is at 100%, but the operating system has completely uninstalled itself.
Oh, that's a perfect way to put it.
Pumping more electricity into it just won't fix the problem. You don't need a longer charging cable. You need a totally different kind of reboot.
That analogy captures the mechanical failure perfectly. The hardware is totally fine. It's the software that directs the hardware's purpose that is corrupted. And this brings us to another necessary distinction, which is distinguishing acedia from sadness or melancholy.
Yeah, I was struck by this in the text. Because when you feel empty, it's so easy to assume you're just sad. But the ancient writers were very careful to separate the two.
They were, and their reasoning is actually quite beautiful. Sadness, even profound grief, usually has a specific object. You were sad because a relationship ended, or you lost a job, or someone you loved passed away.
There's a reason for it.
Right. Sadness is a heavy, painful burden, but it actually proves that the heart is still alive. It testifies to the fact that you loved something, that something mattered to you.
So sadness is essentially the pain of connection. It means the system is working, even if it really hurts.
Yes, sadness shows a capacity for attachment, but acedia is characterized by emotional thinning, like a profound numbness. It is a detachment from everything. When you are in the grip of acedia, joy, sorrow, desire, ambition, they all seem incredibly distant.
Just totally muted.
Exactly. It's like you are observing your own life unfold through a pane of thick, soundproof glass. You see the events happening, you know you should feel something about them, but the emotional resonance just doesn't reach you.
Which naturally leads us to the modern buzzword, right? Burnout. Every time I open a business article, someone is talking about burnout. So how does this differ? Because they sound remarkably similar on the surface.
They're definitely cousins, but they stem from totally different crises. Burnout is fundamentally an overload problem. It is a crisis of capacity. It is the human being asking, how much weight can I possibly carry before my knees buckle?
And the solution is usually doing less.
Exactly. You solve burnout by taking things off the person's plate. You reduce the hours, you delegate the tasks, you relieve the burden.
But if I'm tracking with the logic of acedia, taking the weight off doesn't solve a crisis of meaning, does it?
It doesn't, because acedia is the crisis of meaning. It doesn't ask, how much can I carry? It asks, why does carrying any of this matter at all? You can reduce an acidious person's workload to absolute zero. You can put them in an empty room with zero obligations.
And they'd still feel terrible.
Yes, they will
Right.
still feel that crushing, restless despair. Because the problem isn't the volume of the work, it's the disconnection from its purpose.
I think we need to pause here for a very important clinical disclaimer, just to make sure we are handling these sources responsibly. Because a lot of what we are describing, the numbness, the lack of motivation, feeling disconnected from meaning, it maps very closely onto clinical depression.
Very closely.
And we need to be crystal clear to you listening that acedia does not replace or invalidate the medical reality of depression.
Correct. That is absolutely vital to establish, yes, and the source material is adamant about it. Clinical depression is a serious, often life-threatening medical condition. It involves complex brain chemistry, trauma, nervous system dysregulation, genetics. It requires professional medical care.
Like therapy and medication.
Exactly. Clinical intervention. We are not minimizing medical suffering, nor are we suggesting you can just sort of think your way out of a neurochemical imbalance.
Right. We aren't saying throw away your antidepressants and just go weave a basket. That would be disastrous.
It would be complete malpractice. The sources present acedia as a companion framework. It is an existential and spiritual lens that adds dimension to our understanding of human suffering. Human beings are complex, right? We are biological, psychological, and spiritual
Yeah,
creatures.
it's a both-and situation.
Exactly. A person might absolutely need medication to regulate their serotonin levels just so they can get out of bed, and simultaneously, they might need to confront their acedia to figure out what they are actually getting out of bed for.
That makes total sense. The medication gives you the capacity to engage, but you still have to choose what to actually engage with. If we reduce every single human struggle purely to biology, we risk pathologizing philosophical wounds. We end up treating a crisis of purpose as if it's just, a lack of dopamine.
And that is exactly where modern society tends to misdiagnose this condition. Because we lack the vocabulary of acedia, we fall back on inadequate labels. Historically, the term acedia was slowly mistranslated and flattened into the word sloth, which carried a heavy moral judgment of simple laziness.
Which is incredibly damaging. I mean, if someone is suffering from a collapse of meaning and society points a finger and says, you're just being lazy, pull yourself up by your bootstraps,
Yeah.
you are essentially asking a weakened will to fix a weakened will. It just heaps shame on top of the emptiness.
Exactly. And the modern secular equivalent isn't much better, to be honest. Today, we call it burnout, and we prescribe productivity hacks.
Oh man, the productivity hacks.
We tell people to optimize their morning routine, take ice baths, or restructure their to-do lists. But a new calendar interface fails completely to cure a collapse of purpose. It's treating a spiritual hemorrhage with a digital Band-Aid.
So if this operating system failure isn't just some glitch caused by our modern obsession with smartphones and hustle culture, where did it actually come from? Because my assumption would be that a crisis of distraction and meaninglessness requires a world with 247 news cycles, algorithms, and open-plan offices. But the sources take us entirely in the opposite direction.
They really do. They take us back to the 4th century, to the deserts of Egypt, Syria, and Palestine. We are talking about the early Christian hermits, figures like Evagrius Ponticus, who is really the premier diagnostician of this condition.
Evagrius Ponticus.
Yes. These men and women, known as the desert fathers and mothers, went out into the harsh wilderness to strip away absolutely all societal distractions.
Why, though? I mean, what was the appeal of going into a scorching desert to live in a cave?
Well, they were seeking a laboratory of the soul. The Roman Empire was becoming increasingly comfortable, and they felt that the noise, the politics, and the commerce of the city were distracting them from true spiritual devotion. They believed that by physically removing themselves from the noise of society, by going into extreme isolation and asceticism, they would find perfect, uninterrupted peace.
I can imagine how that actually played out. You think the problem is your noisy neighbors and the traffic, so you move to a stone cell in the middle of nowhere, and suddenly you realize the noise wasn't coming from the street, it was coming from inside your own head.
That is precisely what they discovered. Silence does not automatically generate peace. In fact, when you remove all external stimulation, your inner turmoil often becomes deafening. Evagrius wrote extensively about how, in the absence of societal drama, the monks were forced into a brutal confrontation with their own unresolved anxieties, their resentments, and their ego. And it was in this extreme, low-distraction environment that Evagrius first identified and categorized the specific attack of acedia, which he famously called the noonday demon.
The noonday demon. I mean, it sounds like a horror movie, but the psychological reality of it is just fascinating. The text details how it struck right at midday. And let's try to put ourselves in that environment. Think about the desert at noon.
Right, brutal.
It is the hottest, most oppressive part of the day. The air is entirely still. The sensory deprivation is at its absolute peak. Time doesn't just slow down, it feels like it has completely stopped.
Evagrius describes the monk looking out the tiny window of his cell. He watches the sun, which seems perfectly stationary in the sky. He begins to deeply resent the heat. He resents his cell. He starts to imagine that his life is wasting away, and he fantasizes about being literally anywhere else.
Basically just wanting to teleport away.
Yes. He thinks about the family he left behind, the food he used to eat, the conversations he used to have. The cell, which he originally chose as a place of liberation, suddenly feels like a suffocating prison.
The text calls the cell a mirror. It exposed the massive gap between the monk's outward commitment, like his physical presence in the desert, and his inward consent. Outwardly, he's wearing the robes, he's in the desert, he's a monk. But inwardly, his mind is 1,000 miles away. He has essentially withdrawn his consent to be there.
That withdrawal of consent is the core mechanism of acedia. And Evagrius noted that it manifested as a profound attack on attention. The monk couldn't stay present. He couldn't read his scriptures without losing his
You
place.
couldn't focus.
Exactly. He couldn't pray. He couldn't focus on weaving his daily quota of baskets. His attention was completely fractured by this restless dissatisfaction.
But the truly insidious part, at least according to the sources, is how this demon operated. It didn't show up in a cloud of smoke and say, hey, you should abandon all your morals and go be a terrible person.
Because that would be too obvious.
Right. If it did that, the monk would recognize it as a threat and fight it. Instead, it worked through subtle, almost logical suggestion. It took a true thought. Sitting in this cell is really difficult and boring, and slowly twisted it into a totally destructive conclusion. Therefore, this is entirely meaningless.
That is the diagnostic brilliance of the desert tradition. They understood that acedia rarely announces itself as outright rebellion. It is a master of disguise. It frequently dresses itself up as clarity, or what the writers called a noble restlessness.
Wait, a noble restlessness. Give me an example of that, because that sounds like a trap a lot of us fall into.
The classic monastic example is the monk who is sitting in a cell, battling the boredom and the heat, and suddenly he has a revelation. He thinks, you know what? Sitting out here is selfish. I should leave this desert, go back to Alexandria, and serve the sick. I should be feeding the poor. That is a much better use of my life.
Which sounds incredibly holy. I mean, if a friend told you that today, you'd applaud them. You'd say, wow, what a beautiful, selfless pivot you're making.
It sounds perfectly noble. But the ancient spiritual directors warned that, in the context of the monk's specific vow, this was the ultimate illusion of escape. The monk doesn't actually possess a sudden, burning desire to serve the sick. What he wants is relief. He wants to evade his current difficult commitment. He wants the sensory stimulation of the city and the praise of being a helper. Acedia is using a technically good desire to justify the avoidance of the present duty.
Okay, I have to pause here and push back on this a little, because I'm trying to map this onto a modern life for our listeners, and it's getting tricky. If we say that wanting to leave a difficult situation is just a trick of the demon of acedia, doesn't that promote staying in terrible situations?
That's a very fair concern.
Right. Like if someone's job is completely toxic or their relationship is emotionally abusive, wanting to escape is just healthy boundary setting. How does a person know if their desire to quit is a wise, necessary pivot for their well-being, or just acedia whispering in their ear to avoid the hard work of staying?
That is the essential tension, and it's a vital question. The desert tradition was actually quite pragmatic about this. They did not deny that toxic environments existed. Sometimes a monastery was corrupt or an abbot was abusive. They did not believe in suffering purely for the sake of suffering.
So they weren't masochists.
Not at all. The diagnostic test they applied to differentiate between a necessary departure and acedia was the test of the pattern.
The pattern. Okay, explain how that works.
Well, if you leave a situation because it is genuinely harmful and you move to a healthy environment, your inner peace should eventually stabilize. But acedia is a sickness of the self, not the geography. So the elders would ask the monk, if you change monasteries, do you find yourself feeling this exact same restless despair 6 months later? Does the burning desire to flee repeat itself in every single new setting?
Oh, wow.
If you move to a new city, get a new job, start a new relationship, and you carry the exact same profound emptiness with you every single time, then the problem is acedia, it's not the location.
Right. Wherever you go, there you are. If the common denominator in all your abandoned commitments is you, then changing the scenery isn't going to fix the software bug. The geographical cure never works for a spiritual sickness.
Exactly. You cannot outrun your own inner state. So recognizing this, the desert monks had to develop strategies to fight it. And the sources point specifically to a figure named John Cassian.
John Cassian, right?
Yes, who spent time in the Egyptian desert and then traveled to the West, effectively translating these monastic concepts for a broader audience.
So what did Cassian realize about fighting this? Because sitting in a cell, just gritting your teeth, doesn't sound sustainable at all.
No, and Cassian realized that you cannot defeat acedia purely with the intellect. You couldn't just tell a suffering monk to think better thoughts. The will was too compromised. Cassian saw that physical, bodily anchors were required. Specifically, he mandated manual labor, literally weaving baskets from palm fronds, and strict adherence to community life, particularly total transparency with older, experienced mentors.
It's the combination of grounding the body and exposing the mind. Work gave the monk's day a physical rhythm, a tangible output, and the elders provided a mirror.
Yes.
Like when the monk started saying, I think I need to go to Alexandria to heal the sick, the elder could look at him and say, No, you're just bored. Go back to your cell and weave your baskets. It provided a guardrail against self-deception.
Exactly. Now, to bridge this to you, our listeners, most people hearing this, are not living in a stone cell weaving baskets. But the genius of the source material is how it maps this ancient dynamic onto the modern landscape.
The parallels are almost uncomfortably accurate. I mean, you might be listening to this on a commute or sitting in your home office and thinking you have nothing in common with an Egyptian hermit. But the modern cubicle, the open-plan desk, the glow of your dual monitors, that is your desert cell.
It absolutely is. The noonday demon still hits us today with incredible precision. It just strikes right around 2:00 p.m. on a Tuesday.
Just like we said at the start.
Exactly. The structure is identical. You are isolated in your tasks. The morning adrenaline has faded. The afternoon stretches out endlessly, and you feel that exact same overwhelming urge to flee.
It's so true.
Yeah.
What does the modern worker do at 2:00 p.m.? They don't fantasize about going to Alexandria. They open a new tab and start browsing Zillow for houses in a state they have never visited.
Or looking at other jobs.
Right. They start looking at job postings for careers they have absolutely zero qualifications for. Maybe I should quit marketing and become an artisanal cheesemaker in Vermont. It's the exact modern equivalent of the monk staring out the window.
It is the illusion of escape manifesting through a browser tab.
Sure.
And the source material dives deep into how the structure of the modern workplace actively accelerates and deepens this condition. It introduces the concept of the emptying of purpose.
Okay, unpack that.
Workload, as we discussed with burnout, is a real and pressing issue. But acedia takes root in the workplace when the effort being demanded is inwardly refused by the worker, not because they are lazy, but because the work has been stripped of its human element.
I want to dig into that because the sources specifically call out metrics replacing meaning. And reading that section felt like someone turning on the lights in a dark room for me. Dashboards, quarterly targets, KPIs, they inherently flatten the human experience of work.
If we look at the sociological shift, workers today are becoming deeply cynical because they are increasingly viewed by institutions not as human beings with vocations, but merely as instruments of production, a unit of capacity, a brain attached to a keyboard.
Yeah, totally commodified.
When an organization treats a human being as a completely replaceable cog in a massive machine, it actively cultivates spiritual listlessness. The worker intuitively knows they do not matter to the machine, so the machine ceases to matter to the worker.
The text makes a brilliant point about measurement. It says that measurement is useful when it serves human judgment. But when measurement replaces human judgment, everything breaks down. When the only thing that matters is the metric, we learn to just sort of perform productivity.
We learn to game the system.
Exactly. We aren't doing meaningful work. We are just making sure our Slack dot stays green. We reply instantly to emails, not because we have something valuable or thoughtful to contribute to the conversation, but simply to prove to the panopticon that we are physically sitting at our desks.
Yes.
We optimize for the appearance of work rather than the substance of it.
Which is incredibly exhausting. The psychological dissonance required to perform enthusiasm for a metric you privately know is meaningless is a massive drain on the soul. It forces people to live a divided life. Now, the author of our source text makes a very important point here to keep us grounded. They offer a mature theology of work, warning us not to swing too far in the other direction by over-romanticizing our jobs.
Right, because the expectation that every job must be a profound calling or a passion project can be its own kind of toxic pressure.
Precisely. Not everyone is going to be a pediatric surgeon or a civil rights lawyer. Working simply to pay your rent, buy groceries, and provide for your family is a morally serious, deeply dignified endeavor. Vocation and meaning can absolutely be found in patience, in reliability, in quiet craftsmanship, even in highly unglamorous, repetitive roles. The garbage collector and the data entry clerk have profound dignity.
So meaning isn't restricted to prestige.
Exactly. But, and this is the critical caveat, when a workplace actively strips away all human agency, when it manages through fear, and when it rewards sheer unsustainable exhaustion as the only proof of loyalty, that institution shares the moral responsibility for the acedia of its workers.
It's a systemic issue then.
Yes, it is a systemic hollowing out of the human spirit. It is not just an individual employee's attitude problem.
So trying to optimize your life with more metrics when you are already suffering from acedia is like aggressively monitoring your speedometer while driving entirely in the wrong direction. The data you are collecting is highly accurate. You are definitively going 65 miles per hour, but the journey is completely meaningless. You are making excellent time on the way to a cliff.
That is the danger of the modern productivity movement in a nutshell. We are obsessively optimizing our velocity without ever pausing to question our vector. Where are we actually going? And what makes this crisis so acute in the 21st century is that it isn't just our workplaces demanding this constant metric-driven output. The very technology we reach for to escape the pressure of our work is actually deepening the exact spiritual listlessness we are trying to avoid.
That is a perfect segue into the next major concept from our sources, the fragmented self, and the struggle to rebuild attention in a distracted world. The text describes what it calls the digital shape of acedia, because acedia today doesn't just look like staring blankly at a wall. It often looks like manic, hyper-distracted activity. It is restlessness, disguised as productivity.
It's the endless cycle of microtasks, striving for inbox zero, reorganizing your desktop folders, jumping between 5 different browser windows. It feels like work. It mimics the pace of work, but it is fundamentally an avoidance tactic.
It's avoidance of what, though? What are we running from when we rapidly cycle through our apps?
We are running from interior silence. We are terrified of being left alone with our own thoughts. When the work is hard or when the midday emptiness hits, we immediately reach for our phones to scroll. We tell ourselves we are taking a break. We think it is rest. But scrolling is not rest.
No, it really isn't.
It is a digital anesthetic. It sedates the mind rather than refreshing it.
I wrote down a phrase from the text that hit me right in the chest. Stimulation without nourishment. It is the perfect description of a 2-hour social media binge. It's like eating an entire family-sized bag of neon orange potato chips. Your mouth was moving, you consumed thousands of calories, your brain is absolutely wired on salt and artificial coloring, but your body is still starving for actual nutrition. The mind is receiving a fire hose of constant input feeds, notifications, 15-second videos, but the heart remains completely unfed.
And the consequence of that constant low-grade stimulation is that our attention becomes severely fractured. The sources argue that because we have trained our brains to consume information in tiny, fragmented bursts, sustained effort now feels inherently unnatural to us.
Like trying to read a long book.
Exactly. Reading a dense book, engaging in deep, uninterrupted work, or simply sitting in prayer or meditation, these activities require a duration of attention that we have conditioned ourselves to reject. The moment the task becomes slightly difficult, the brain demands its digital pacifier.
But the sources take this a step further, and I found this to be the most profound insight in the entire deep dive. They argue that attention isn't just a cognitive skill you use to get your homework done. Attention is a spiritual faculty.
Yes. What we attend to shapes what we love. If you constantly direct your attention toward trivial, fleeting, hyper-reactive digital inputs, your capacity to love deep, lasting, complex things begins to atrophy. Fragmented attention literally fragments the self.
Let's break that down because it's a really heavy concept. How does fragmented attention fragment the self?
Well, think about how a notification works. It is designed to interrupt. Every time you allow a notification to pull you away from your current task, you are training your will to obey external pressure rather than internal conviction.
Oh, wow.
You become a purely reactive creature. You respond to whatever buzzes first, rather than choosing from the core of your being what is truly important. Over time, that inner core, the part of you that initiates action based on deeply held values, weakens. You lose the cohesiveness of your own identity.
And while our identity is fracturing, we are simultaneously exposing ourselves to the curated digital lives of thousands of other people, which leads directly to the comparison and envy trap. The sources note how digital culture turns our own ordinary, perfectly fine lives into a source of massive disappointment.
Because on a feed, you only see the extraordinary. You see the peak experiences, the filtered vacations, the massive career announcements.
Right. Nobody's posting a slow-motion cinematic video of themselves holding their children's laundry or, answering a standard, boring email from accounting.
Exactly. And because we consume so much of the extraordinary, we start to despise the humble, repetitive tasks that actually make up 95% of a human life. We lose our reverence for the dignity of the ordinary. We believe that if our lives aren't constantly generating highlight reel content, then our lives are failing. This fuels acedia by stripping the meaning away from our daily duties.
The text also connects this to what it calls the paralysis of possibility, which feels like a paradox. We usually think of freedom and having lots of choices as the ultimate good. But the author argues that modern freedom, the freedom to live anywhere, work any job, and constantly reinvent yourself, actually creates acute anxiety.
Freedom without direction is terrifying, Acedia thrives in an environment where you have endless options but no strong guiding values to help you choose among them. If you can be anyone and do anything, then committing to one specific path feels like a trap.
Because committing to one path means saying no to all the other potential paths.
Precisely. You fear missing out on all the other theoretical possibilities. So to preserve your absolute freedom, you commit to nothing. You keep all your options open, but a life with all its options kept perpetually open is a life that is never actually lived. You end up hovering above your own existence, feeling entirely weightless and disconnected.
Okay, I have to jump in here and wrestle with this because I feel incredibly challenged by this section. I understand the philosophical danger of fragmented attention and keeping options open, but practically speaking, in the modern world, multitasking feels like a basic survival skill.
It does.
The water level is rising, and if I don't spin a dozen plates at once, I'm going to drown. If I single task, if I turn off my notifications, close my tabs, and just focus on one thing for an hour, won't I fall hopelessly behind? How do we balance this ancient need for staying power with the very real demands of a world that expects immediate responses?
It is a completely valid fear, and the transition from hyperconnectivity to deliberate attention is painful. But we have to recognize a hard truth about our modern environment. Urgency often imitates importance.
Oh, that's good. Urgency imitates importance.
We feel that spinning all those plates is absolutely required, but much of that urgency is manufactured by institutional anxiety, not genuine human value. If we look closely at the cost of multitasking, the expert consensus, both ancient and modern, is that fragmented attention creates profound emotional distance from our work. If you never hold a project in your mind long enough to really know it, you can never take true pride in it. You are just skimming the surface of your own life.
So the quality of our attention dictates the quality of our connection to the work.
Exactly. True depth, true satisfaction, and ultimately true effectiveness require duration. You might answer fewer emails if you single task. You might miss a cultural moment on social media. But the work you do produce will have actual substance. The relationships you do engage in will have actual intimacy. Quality must triumph over frantic quantity if we are going to survive acedia.
But recognizing the problem of digital fragmentation and the noonday demon is only half the battle, right? Staring at the problem doesn't fix it. We need a practical blueprint. How do we take these ancient monastic tools, basket weaving, staying in a cell, talking to elders, and build a modern scaffolding for our souls?
That brings us to the final, most crucial segment of our deep dive, the discipline of staying. The practical daily routines required to restore inner meaning. And the first thing we have to understand is that the monastic response to acedia was never a frantic, aggressive self-improvement program. It was not a 30-day boot camp.
No intense life overhauls.
No, it was always a slow, gentle return to presence, order, humility, and love.
The sources outline a very specific path for this recovery, and rule number 1 is incredibly grounding. Start small and concrete. When you feel that massive existential dread, the instinct is to try and overhaul your entire life in one weekend. You think you need a vision board, a 10-year plan, a new career. The text says no, just wash the dishes, make your bed.
Because when acedia dominates you, your will loses confidence in itself. You feel paralyzed, unable to bridge the gap between knowing what you should do and actually doing it. Trying to execute a massive life change when your will is that weak is a recipe for failure, which only deepens the despair. Small, concrete, physical duties begin to restore the trust between your intention and your action.
You intend to make the bed, and then you physically make the bed. The loop is successfully closed. You prove to yourself that you can act in the world.
Yes, and critically, the sources emphasize a principle that runs counter to everything modern culture teaches us. Meaning often follows action. It does not always precede it.
That is so countercultural. The modern mantra is always, find your passion and then do the work. We are told we need to feel deeply inspired before we commit.
But the wisdom of the desert says, do the work faithfully and the passion will eventually form. You cannot wait on the sidelines of your life for the feeling of meaning to suddenly strike you like lightning. You have to act. You behave your way into new ways of feeling.
Okay, next on the practical list from our sources is structured silence. And this isn't just try to be quiet sometimes. The text suggests a dedicated 5 to 10 minutes a day using a simple anchor like a specific word or focusing on your breath. But the most important part isn't achieving absolute zen, it's what happens when you fail to be zen.
Right.
The key is to notice the urge to escape. When the anxiety, the boredom, or the grief flares up, you don't fight it, and you don't grab your phone. You just watch it without judging it.
It is a practice of endurance. And you must rigorously protect this silence from productivity metrics. Do not finish your 10 minutes of silence and immediately evaluate it by asking, did this make me a more efficient worker today? Did this lower my blood pressure so I can send more emails? That completely defeats the
It
purpose.
ruins it.
It does. Silence is not a biohack. It is a practice of availability. It trains the person to simply receive life, to exist in the presence of themselves rather than constantly trying to manage or manipulate reality.
The text also highly recommends journaling for spiritual honesty. But again, there's a specific technique. It's not just writing, I had a bad day, everything sucks. It's about diagnosing the exact texture of the feeling. Are you actually feeling resentment toward a coworker? Are you feeling envy because of something you saw online? Are you grieving a lost opportunity?
You have to get specific.
Yeah, you track these patterns without condemning yourself. And crucially, you are instructed to record small signs of life. A bird outside the window, a good cup of coffee, a kind text message, to actively counter the brain's negative filtering.
Journaling interrupts the vagueness of acedia. Acedia wants to keep you in a hazy fog where everything is just awful all the time. When you are forced to write down the specifics, you create distance between yourself and the emotion. You move from the overwhelming state of saying, I am completely empty, to the objective observation of, acedia is happening in me right now. That small linguistic separation restores a measure of freedom to your mind.
The next step is one that I think is going to be the hardest for most of us, myself included: limiting digital exposure. The sources explicitly recommend creating device-free thresholds for the first and last 30 minutes of the day. And throughout the day, practicing single-tasking your attention. We have to learn to distinguish true rest from digital sedation. Staring at Twitter or TikTok for an hour on the couch is not resting your brain, it is actively numbing it.
We have to reclaim the boundaries of our days. Furthermore, the monastic tradition insists that we must treat the body as a spiritual witness. Acedia is profoundly embodied. It is not just in your head. Therefore, sleep, food, and posture matter immensely.
How does physical posture affect a spiritual crisis of meaning?
Because the body and the mind are engaged in a constant feedback loop. If you are chronically sleep-deprived, poorly nourished, and physically slumped, the world will inevitably appear harsher and more demanding than it actually is. And the danger is that you will interpret that physical harshness as a crisis of existential meaning rather than recognizing it as a simple lack of REM sleep. You will think your life is falling apart when really you just need a nap and a decent meal.
Which brings us right back to John Cassian's ancient remedy of manual tasks. The sources revive this for the modern world. Woodworking, gardening, kneading bread, cleaning a room. These physical activities steady the mind precisely because they produce visible, tangible progress. If your inner world is chaotic and abstract, a spreadsheet isn't going to help you. But sweeping a cluttered floor becomes a clean floor. Your hands just created order in the physical world. It gives the mind immense cognitive relief.
It grounds you in reality. It pulls you out of the abstract anxieties of the mind and puts you firmly in the tactile world of the hands. And finally, the text emphasizes meaningful service, but it stresses that this service should be modest and it should be near at hand. You do not need to fly across the world to build an orphanage.
Start local.
Right. Visit a lonely neighbor down the street, cook a meal for a friend who just had a baby. Service turns the self outward. It breaks the narcissistic isolation of acedia.
But the text includes a really vital caveat here. It must be boundaried service. If you serve others to the point of complete self-erasure, if you ignore your own basic needs in order to be a savior, you will just accelerate your burnout. Healthy service connects your action with meaning. It doesn't demand martyrdom.
If we pull all these practices back and look at them together, the structured silence, the honest journaling, the manual labor, the boundaried service, they all share one fundamental underlying theme, which is patient repetition. Modern culture views repetition as stagnation. We want constant novelty, constant upgrades, new experiences. But the wisdom of the desert is that strength, trust, and skill are built through returning to the exact same good practices day after day after day.
I was trying to visualize how all these routines work together, and an analogy came to mind. Building these daily repetitive rituals isn't about creating a rigid, punishing prison for yourself. It's more like building a trellis for a tomato plant.
A trellis, I like that. Walk me through it.
Well, if you just plant a tomato vine and leave it alone, it sprawls out in the dirt. It gets chaotic, the leaves get eaten by bugs, the fruit rots on the wet ground, and it dies. It has total freedom, but it destroys itself.
Right.
If you build a wooden trellis, you are introducing structure. You tie the vine to the wood. Now, the structure isn't there to imprison the plant. The structure is what actually supports the plant so it can grow upward, access the sunlight, and bear fruit. The routine is the guardrail for your will. When your internal motivation completely evaporates on a Tuesday afternoon, the routine is the trellis that holds you up until the motivation returns.
That is a beautiful, deeply accurate way to understand it. The structure serves life, it doesn't suffocate it.
Yeah.
And there is one final piece to this trellis that we cannot ignore. It must include other people. Acedia's most dangerous trick is isolation. It whispers to you that your emptiness is entirely unique, that no one else could possibly understand how you feel, and that your condition is deeply shameful and must be hidden.
Which is exactly why the desert monks valued community and confession. And in this context, confession doesn't necessarily mean a formal religious rite. It just means rigorous truth-telling to another human being.
Exactly. Telling a trusted friend, a mentor, or a therapist, I am struggling to care about anything right now. I feel completely empty, breaks the illusion of uniqueness. It shines light on the demon. It allows the community to hold you and support your weight when your own individual will has collapsed. We cannot survive acedia alone.
Okay, let's take a deep breath and pull all this together. We have gone on quite the journey today. We started by drawing a hard line between true spiritual exhaustion acedia and mere fatigue or burnout. We learned that burnout is a crisis of capacity asking, how much can I carry? While acedia is a crisis of meaning asking, why does this matter at all?
And we trace the origins of this condition back to the 4th century desert monks, exploring how Evagrius Ponticus identified the noonday demon as an attack on our attention and our consent to be present.
And we saw how that exact same ancient demon sits in our home offices today. It thrives in workplaces that replace human meaning with metrics, and it is fed by our fragmented, hyper-distracted digital habits that sedate our minds while starving our souls.
But most importantly, we explored the remedy. Not endless novelty, not a frantic search for a new passion, and certainly not more productivity hacks, but a disciplined, patient return to reality through physical action, silence, and community.
Utilizing those practical routines, the structured silence, the manual labor, the device-free thresholds, to rebuild our trellis. So, to you listening, if you are sitting at your desk at 2:30 p.m. feeling that crushing weightlessness, remember that purpose isn't something you magically find hiding under a rock or in a new job description. It is formed through devotion. It is built through small, faithful acts. You do not have to wait to feel inspired to begin. You act first, and the meaning will follow.
As we close, I want to leave you with a final reflection to mull over in your own time. I want you to think about the one ordinary, unglamorous responsibility in your life right now that you deeply resent. The specific task that makes you stare out the window like a desert monk at noon, wishing you were anywhere else. What if that exact task is not an obstacle to your true purpose, but the actual hidden training ground for your capacity to love? What happens if you approach it tomorrow not as a cage to escape, but as a practice to master?
That is a profound paradigm shift. The diagnostic muddy waters are definitely clearing up. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into these sources. Keep questioning, keep learning, and whatever you do, don't let the noonday demon win. Take care.